Okay, so good morning again. Today's discussion is the Keytool command, whatever the heck that is going to be used for. Let's jump into it and see what goes on here with this presentation. Session overview will take about an hour. Probably shouldn't take that long to just discuss the Keytool command. Basically, the focus here is on security certificate stuff being a technical term. Keytool command is one of several utilities you would use to do security certificate work. Seems to be more and more important as we progress down the road of versions of CCE or PCCE or really whatever. I'm going to ask for your input. Should be noted that I'm perhaps the world's worst security person. I'm not a very good security person by my own admission. Grew up in a household where we never locked the house. I don't actually have a key for my current house. Somebody locked the doors and I couldn't get in the garage. I don't know what I do. So not a great security person. So this is all, I suppose, stuff I've learned along the way, just about some of the tools that you'll see in use here in the CCE world. All of you who joined today, I guess it was the target audience. And what is the goal today is to show you a little bit about certificate management. Perhaps you're like me, you don't like security so well. You're a voice engineer, a contact center engineer, get other things to do, get security people, you know, those people are all right, just not one of them. So maybe we can help you out a little bit. Keytool command, important thing here is let's call it the Windows flavor of a Java tool that will allow you to manage certificates on your Windows servers, in this case, ICM and CVP servers. By comparison, we'll show you other VOS server certificate management, what you would typically do there. Big thing here, people. If you've got a question along the way or something to shout out, something to add in, if you hear me say something and I'm wrong, you let me know. I'm okay with that. Remember, I just told you I'm not the world's best security person, so whatever. So today's session, my goal is to basically cover security certificates overview, kind of just a real quick overview on using maybe self-signed certificates versus using some kind of a real certificate authority server. I know that since I've gone down the road of trying both of those, and I usually try those for class to see the effect of things, likely there's some of you out there that are maybe doing self-signed certs or wondering about CA services. So we'll have a brief discussion about how that would work out. We'll take a look at the voice operating system certificate work as a comparison to what we'll get into with the Keytool command. It's maybe a little bit easier to see and navigate, in this case, with servers like Call Manager, VVBs, Contact Center Express, whatever, anything that runs on that Linux-based OS. We'll take a look at that certificate management first and then use that as a comparison to Keytool command that we use for ICM servers, as well as CVP. And you might think the Keytool command is the exact same tool for both those servers, but it's a slightly different tool for both those two types of servers. And Q&A at the end, but ask questions as you have them along the way. Okay, so first thing we see here is not exactly related to all things contact center, and not necessarily related to exactly what we're discussing here. In this case, they're trying to use some transport layer security, some security on maybe with secure RTP along the way, but the concept is the same here. We've got a bunch of servers that need to somehow trust each other, communication-wise, back and forth, CVP to Call Manager, and we've got a VVB in there. We've got some cubes, whatnot. And if we're going to use self-signed certificates, meaning each server kind of signs its own certificate, we're going to have to make sure that in this case, a peer-to-peer fashion, all of these certificates are exchanged between all of these peers. And what we're pointing out on the right-hand side is a couple of distinctions here between some of the components. If you're going to use CVP for security administration, you're going to use this Keytool command. Cube, trust point command. I don't have any trust point information in here. Not too familiar with that command. And the VVBs and things like Call Manager, we're going to use a GUI interface. By the way, these slides here I stole from somewhere else, which probably came from perhaps some of you or somebody for sure at Cisco out there. So here we've got a bunch of certificates, and the goal with self-signed certificates, make sure that we're importing the peers of all the certificates. Now, as we get into the CCE world, and you see 10 later sessions today, we talk about the installation of PCCE. I don't know, there's 15 so servers, depending on, of course, your deployment. There's a whole lot of servers. So if you've got to exchange peer certificates with all of your other peers, that at some point in time becomes quite onerous. So everybody's got to get a copy of everybody else's certificate before we can really trust each other, and then do secure things like secure RTP or really communicate. So we'll call that a peer-to-peer environment, like using H323 without Gatekeeper back in the day, or using SIP without a SIP proxy. So here, as an equivalent, we're going to talk about using a certificate authority server. And that, analogy wise, is certainly like, oh, hey, let's use a SIP proxy to consolidate our dial plan, or let's use Gatekeeper or SME or something like that. Again, just as an analogy here, certificate authority server is a higher entity that we trust, and we're going to exchange some certificates with that certificate authority. So we're going to see that each host or node here, each peer, going to generate a new certificate request that we're going to send off to the CA server, get that signed, and import the root certificate of the CA server as well as the signed copy of the certificate. And what that now effectively allows us to do is to say, well, if we all trust the CA server, because we do, then by definition, I guess we all trust each other. So we can go back to communicating with each other. And as you'll see here a little bit, you might see this a little bit more in the later discussion of PCCE, but basically, if you want a whole lot less work to do if you're trying to set up PCCE, I would highly recommend you probably use certificate authority services. So it's just a whole lot less work with what you have to do. Key thing, though, is that each host, again, is going to have to generate a CSR, certificate signing request, get it signed by the CA, and then each host has to import really two certificates, the CA certificate as well as the signed certificate. We'll see that in this discussion this morning. All right, so first thing I start off with is maybe just systems I don't know why I assume this, but probably because there's more of them out there, systems you might be more familiar with. And that's all of your voice operating systems and their certificates. Things like Call Manager, CUIC, Live Data, IDS servers, Finesse servers, VVBs, CCX servers. You likely are familiar with those types of servers. You've used them before, logged into them once or twice, I imagine. So here we're logging on to the CM platform interface. That interface is common across all those servers. So as long as you know, typically the fully qualified domain name, IP address, whatnot, 8443 as a port /CM platform. Here we're logged on as the OS administrator in this particular interface. And under security is where we're headed for security or certificate management. So that's the place here where we go to administer certificates. And
Mike, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Hey, I've worked quite a bit with certificates for various UC servers. When there's a need for a public CA authority, like, for example, if we have a customer that needs to get to a Finesse desktop, then it makes sense to have a public CA. I'm trying to understand when it makes sense, though, in a UCC. Like, I don't see a need for customers to be able to reach ICM, for example. Only CCDM maybe, or Finesse, but not the servers themselves. So when is a good time to use self-signed versus the CA?
Well, that's maybe a good question. We'll open up for the greater discussion of people out there. I guess what I will tell you is, by example, in our, in my lab environment that I'm trying to put together ultimately for all of you to come back as students for, trying to ponder exactly how I'm going to put together this deployment-ish class along the way and what we'll do with ultimately that aspect of things. But to that point, kind of comes back to, well, like I've got to have certificates. I can't, as you'll find out maybe in the SPOG session, if you attend that today, you're not going to get anything to install and work unless you do some certificate work. So you either got to use self-signed or a CA server. Well, I said, let me try both, see what's involved in that whole process. And self-signed was doable, but pretty painful because of all the peers that are associated. And so, fine, let's not spend the money on a real CA server. That's going to cost some money, but let me stand one up in Active Directory, a certificate authority server, and just utilize that. I'm really not per se using a CA service that I have to pay for or that's authorized everywhere because of the lab environment. So I don't know if that helps or not, but anybody else have input on, in the real world with your customers, what most people would typically do?
I know we spend thousands of dollars on certificates when it comes to Finesse and other servers that really need them for the customer to be able to access the web pages. But in a environment like ICM where they don't need to reach most of those servers, I don't see the need unless you have some insights as to where it's more important to have CA.
Well, I think, it's doable either way, without a CA or just using self-signed certificates or with a CA.
Did you say it's easier with the CA than the self-signed?
Most definitely.
Oh, wow.
I would say that anyway, just because it's on every server. What you'll ultimately probably see, and this is again more evident in the session forthcoming on the SPOG, you've got really multiple certificates in some cases per server. You've got web certificates that need to be exchanged from, let's call them IIS certificates, and you've got diagnostic framework Portico certificates from your ICM and CVP servers that also need to be exchanged about. So, in some cases, you're actually exchanging 2 security certificates per server times, if you get 20 servers out there, each server needs 19 other certificates times, maybe another 2. So it just became pretty onerous ultimately at the end to get all the right certificates at the right spot. A little maybe microcosm of that is that if you've ever, as you would have, set up CUIC and Finesse and live data, you know that there's an order of who needs whose certificate. But at the end of the day, if you give everybody's certificate, then you go, well, I guess I'm pretty much covered. So that's a small microcosm with just those 3 servers. But if you can envision 20 servers now all perhaps needing everybody else's certificate, you just have a bunch of certificates you've got to put in place. And geez, what if you inadvertently whack one of those certificates or create a new one? I don't know. It just seemed to me, once I actually got down to doing both of those, because I tried to do that to demo the whole process, that when I got to the CA part, I at the end said, it seemed a whole lot easier to me. Anybody else have any input on general certificate stuff that you're using out there in the real world for your customers and whatnot in a somewhat closed environment often?
Yeah, I think this is Aaron, sorry. I think you're right on that when it comes to self-signed and CA signed. And to your point, I mean, you can have a CA signed from an external resource, or you can have your own internal certificate authority like Microsoft if you want to save some money. But the way I'm observing is that the general rule is I think everybody is going to the public CAs to get certificates, and you're right, it will cost money because right now I think it's limited to 2 years or something like that. But you can also have an internal CA like a Microsoft CA do the signing for you. That has been my observation.
I think most sophisticated customers have internal policy that directs them how to manage the internal CA versus a public trusted CA. But if it comes down to, a public trusted CA, then that's a cost of business anymore.
Right. Right.
And it just depends. We have premise-based customers, Stan, that they use internal CAs, and they did want to have certs for everything, for PCCE, CVP, et cetera, only so they didn't have to click on that self-sign error to get into the page.
Right.
But we're in our hosted customers, right? That's obviously why we have the CA for the customer accessible URLs. But per your point, is there really a need to do UCCE, CVP, CCadmin when they won't have access? I would say no, unless you just don't want to deal with that, having to click through that self-sign cert issue. The only change is in CCE 12.5, you have to apply the self-sign certs at a minimum via the CC, that tool that we're going to be going over today. But to your point, I agree. If your customers aren't going to access those pages, you don't mind clicking through that self-sign, I don't think there's really a need.
Right. That I totally agree.
One other thing to think about, you guys, when it comes to the certificates is I wonder if this thing's going to support wildcard certs, where you can essentially put all of the host names into one cert and spread them across the entire environment, instead of having to request a cert for each component.
Yeah,
so the boss definitely don't, because we've dealt with that, because it's much cheaper to do the wildcard. The boss systems don't. I'm not sure about UCCE.
Well, let me talk.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
What else you got to input there? That's good stuff. Good conversations here, people.
No, go ahead. I think you'll cover that as the questions I had. It's all good. You can go ahead.
Okay. So let's just maybe recap one thing on that question. Fine question, great conversation. Historically, if you don't mind clicking on that certificate warning you get in your browser, yeah, we don't even really care about certificates. As you will find in the next discussion on packaged implementation, or in the real world when you start working on it, you really can't get anything installed in version 12 unless you do some certificate work. And that was certainly mentioned in the fine print in one of the discussions there along the way. So there's a couple of things involved. There's the inconvenience of just seeing some certificate warnings and wondering, geez, is this what kind of organization am I working with? Well, if it's your organization, you go, it's just a certificate thing. That's one inconvenient thing. The other thing, as you mentioned, is real customers. Real customers, when they see those warnings, might shy away from doing business with you. So that's why you would spend the money to use a real CA server, but it does cost money. So only thing I can recommend is, you're trying to do this in a lab, by example, you might consider your own CA server. Just seem to be less work with this utility. But again, all things being what they are, there you go. So one of the questions I just heard was kind of wildcards with certificates. And I did actually ask that question to my point of contact over there at Cisco, a couple other things. I haven't actually got anything back yet, but obviously it's not in the current version, so maybe it's something they're working on. But here's an example, if you will, of something analogous to, I think, what you're after here. If I generate a certificate signing request, I'm in any one of my voice operating systems. Let's call this Call Manager, which is where I'm at in this screenshot here. I'm going to generate a certificate signing request. And in the distribution screen or interface or field on the certificate itself, which I'm generating for Tomcat purposes here, one of the options is a multi-server or SAN certificate signing request. And that allows you to basically have multiple subject alternative names, SANs, that get populated as part of this one certificate request. So instead of having to have a certificate for each of my servers in my cluster, I basically have one certificate request that's valid for all servers in my cluster. So I interpret your question as being, is there any such thing equivalent of that for ICM, where I could have one certificate request that would be good for my routers and loggers and PGs and whatnot? And to the best of my knowledge, that answer is no. However, what I will also state is that at least to get PCCE to install, the chief culprit, as far as most of your certificate work is concerned, is actually your primary distributor admin workstation. That seems to be the device that needs the majority of the certificates, the PGs in there as well. Well, let's include the routers and might as well throw the loggers in there too. So never mind, I even said that. They all kind of need certificates. So remember, there's kind of a multi-step process here. We're going to generate a signing request from the cluster, in this case using not just one server, but multiple servers. And what that's done is generated a certificate signing request. But notice right now in the GUI, I only have 3 options. After this process is done, I notice, hey, there's a new option that showed up. Now I can actually go out and download that certificate signing request. And again, the purpose of this CSR is for Tomcat purposes. So downloading this is something I would look as being familiar to me. I saved it as a CUCM_tomcat.csr file. And it's this certificate signing request file that I'm going to now use to submit to my CA server to actually get a signed request for this certificate. So here I've used a local CA server, just used Windows Certificate Services. So logging into that URL, I'm requesting a certificate, bottom left-hand side of the page, doing an advanced certificate request, and choosing the bottom option down there of submitting a certificate in the correct encoded format. And what that brings up is another screen where I take the contents then of that CSR file that I got, open that up in Notepad by example, copy and paste that whole certificate request over here to the top left-hand side that we've got highlighted. And the certificate template I'm using is a web server. When you have a CA server that you build, there's a couple of different templates that are included by default. But basically what I'm looking for with this web server security certificate is to do server-to-server trusting adventures. And that's really what this web server cert template is used for. You might have, if you're doing single sign-on or whatnot, have other templates that you've built for this purpose. And basically, as long as you're doing some server-to-server certificate work, you're probably good there. Once I take this certificate and hit submit, as long as I'm using a local CA server, the screen comes back in about 0.001 seconds to say, hey, here's your certificate. In the real world, might take a day or 2 or so to actually get a real CA server. You certainly got to pay somebody along the way. Here, no cost involved. So I'm going to download this as a base 64 encoded certificate. I'm choosing to download the certificate itself. And now what it's saving as a certificate file, security certificate file that I've got named, in this case, CUCM. While I'm here, might as well go ahead and download the CA certificate from the certificate authority. A couple different ways to actually get that certificate, but one is right within the GUI interface itself. You can actually download the CA certificate from here. So remember, we really need 2 certificates, the one we just got signed and the CA certificate as well. So we've got 2 of those. Now what I have to do is I have to go back to my voice operating system servers and upload 2 certs to those servers. I've got to upload the CA certificate as a Tomcat Trust certificate, and I must do that first. If you don't do that first, the certificate you upload, it says, geez, you're trying to ask me to trust somebody I don't even know anything about. That's not exactly what it says, but more or less. So upload the CA certificate first. We're showing you that here. And when I do an upload a certificate chain, I'm putting in Tomcat-Trust as my purpose. Put a friendly name in here. This can be most anything you want to. I think you can even leave it blank. And notice what I'm adding here is the CA that came from, in this case, the CA server itself. As a Tomcat cert, after I get that uploaded, add another cert as just a Tomcat cert, and that's where I'm uploading just the call manager signed certificate that the CA server signed. And After I do all that uploading and whatnot, I get some messages on the right-hand side that says your certificate was uploaded, asks me to restart Tomcat and or, perhaps just restart all of the nodes. So it tells me here, at least I got to restart Cisco Tomcat. And that then, of course, all those certificates, some of your light reading along the way, or at least in my light reading along the way, it indicated that, geez, I was going to have to actually do this across all the different servers in the cluster. I didn't really need to do that. If I use that CA service and this one certificate method, all this was broadcast to all those servers in the cluster. You can see it even says so down there, right? Work for all these nodes. So it seemed like that was a pretty easy way to go. All right, so as an analogy, I kind of use that as maybe something you're familiar with to start to discuss this thing called the Keytool command. Keytool command is a way to, let's call it, massage a CA database locally within a Windows server. You might think there'd be some kind of fancy GUI tool. To my knowledge, I haven't seen one out there. Ask the people, they don't know about it. So whatever, we're going to show you the Keytool command and how we can basically do the same thing that we just did over there in the VOS operating systems. We'll show you that you might need to remove some existing certs, as you could do over there in the voice operating system. You can just delete them if you want to. How to generate the new key pair, how to generate a CSR, how to get your CA signed cert, import it. And then, of course, usually you're going to be restarting Tomcat and wash, rinse, and repeat across some of your servers. Again, here, another time-saving process when you come back for the afternoon session on PCC and the SPOG. Saved a lot of time by using CA services here versus manual cert requests, especially with some of the passwords we'll talk about. So I'm showing you a couple of things here that actually I'll explain on the next page. Notice, at least on this first page here, I'm showing you the Keytool command, which we'll talk to you about how you get there with the -help switch. So /? Or a -help, the /? will actually throw an error, but then it'll say, hey, if you want to see help information, do a -help. And you're going to probably need to use that -help command or whatever versions of the command to get helpful information about how to use this, but not extensive in what you actually probably need to know. Not all these commands will be needed. Remember, big picture wise here, that we're on some Windows server. In this case, we're actually on an ICM server. And apparently there is some kind of a certificate store that we need to manage on this ICM server. And apparently that's some kind of a Java-based certificate store. And it's in a specific location. So that's one thing we've got to be concerned about, is where is this store that we're working with, where we're actually storing all the certificates. And the other thing that we're worried about is where is the utility on this server that actually allows us to modify the contents or view the contents of that store. And that utility is called the Keytool command. All right. And unfortunately, as you'll see across these servers, where the store exists versus where the command is, and whether or not the command is in your search path of environment variables, it remains to be seen. So some exercise, a little bit of exercise in futility here, as you'll see, but bear with me. First thing you notice I'm doing is I'm on my primary AW. And again, when you're trying to stand up PCCE, your primary AW is mostly where you're going to have to do quite a bit of certificate work on. And what I'm doing is just using a basically a parameter environment variable here to change to the home directory for where Java exists. And depending on what version of CCE you're running, you're probably going to see some variations with what version of Java you're running. This is from a 12.5.1 screenshot that was in beta release at the time. And notice what that changed me to is the x86 program files /Java folder /JRE of some version folder. And that at least is a shortcut to kind of get me close to where I need to be. I'm changing now into the lib security folder, live security folder. So now I'm in the program files, Java, JRE, lib, security folder, typing in a directory listing here, and what I notice is in that folder is this file called the CA certs file. And it's the CA certs file that actually contains a whole bunch of different security certificates. And just like Call Manager out of the box, Call Manager has a bunch of trusted certs that came from Cisco along the way that really came from other CA services. And the same thing is true of this file. It's got 78 files by default or something within there, or entries within there of all your trusted locations like GoDaddy and whatnot. Okay, so our goal is to add, remove, or modify entries within the CA certs file. And what we're going to use is this command called the Keytool command to help us out with this. So notice I'm still in that file, or in that folder structure where the CA certs file exists. And you don't have to be in that folder structure, but using the Keytool command, you have to somehow point to that CA certs file, as we'll talk about with this command here in a second. And so it's helpful if you're in that folder, and it's helpful in this case that Cisco, at least on the ICM servers, made the Keytool command something that's in your search path. So it don't have to be any specific folder to run the Keytool command, because Windows can find that command along the way, wherever I'm at. So I'm in the folder where the CA certs file is, and I'm running a Keytool/help command. I get context-sensitive help about how to use that command. Here we're showing you a basic example of that command. I'm using the Keytool-list command. And what comes after the -list, as far as the order of things you put in there, doesn't exactly matter along the way in some cases. So you'll see some variations in these commands, but I'm trying to do basically a simple list using the Keytool command of a key store. That's that thing we were just talking about. Key store named CA certs. If my key store was named Bubba, I'd have to type in -keystore space Bubba. And when I hit enter here, system comes back and asks me for a password. And I go, oh man, what's my password? Well, right here in text, so you know what the heck it is a password of change it. And that's the default password that is in place, at least on the ICM servers, for your doggone key store, which is named CA certs, which is in this crazy directory structure over here. Okay. Now, CVP servers, unfortunately, we'll have to go digging a little bit harder for that password. It's unique across each server. Show that here in 1 second. So some other commands I might use with this doggone key store command. Let's say that I'm trying to add or update an entry in the key store. Might get some kind of error message that says, hey, that entry already exists in the key store. And it doesn't ever give you an option to do something like, would you like to overwrite this entry because it's newer? It doesn't tell you that. It just says, it's already in there. And then, says, what do you want to do next? So here is an example. Up top, I'm doing a Keytool list command. And now I'm adding on an alias switch with that command to see an entry. So I'm trying to do a Keytool-list command in that CA certs folder. And I'm, instead of just doing a -list, I'm throwing a -alias in there as well. And the alias is whatever alias somebody's provided when they added that entry in here. In this case, that's my primary DAW, really with its fully qualified domain name effectively. And I'm saying what key store I'm trying to look in. I'm trying to look in the CA certs key store. And I've also just added a -v here to say I want to look at stuff in a verbose fashion. And after I type in my key store password to change it, it of course lists my entry and says, oh yeah, here you got an alias entry, and it shows me a bunch of certificate gibberish information, X509 stuff along the way down below that I've truncated there. So plainly I've got an entry that exists already in my key store, and for whatever reason I've got a newer certificate or whatnot, I've got to get rid of this entry. If I was to try to just do an add, as you'll see here in a second, it won't allow me to do that. So I might have to do a Keytool-delete command. Keytool-delete says, all right, well, you have to provide information about who you're trying to delete. So I'd like to delete this one alias, daw1.sunsetcc.com, from the key store. named CA Certs. And hopefully you're okay with the fact that all the stuff is just on one line, but the screenshot, I've put that on 2 lines. So you're just typing all this stuff together on 1 line. And again, I hit enter on the password to change it. And now you see at the bottom, I'm doing another Keytool list command. Again, looking for the alias of daw1.sunsetcc.com and the key store CA certs. And when I type my password to change it, it comes back with an error, if you will, Keytool error. Alias DAW1 does not exist. So this is my only real input into the fact that if you put in an alias name up top and it doesn't exist, you just get an error, but it tells you why, because it's not there. All right, sounds good. Knowing that, we might now say, all right, again, for our ICM servers and our CVP servers, just like we had to do with our VOS servers, what we're going to have to do is some certificate request work, get that stuff signed and sent back. Well, actually, the first thing you're going to have to do is generate a new key pair, in this case for the alias. What you're really trying to do is specify basically your X509 information that you see. By example, when you install Call Manager, one of those screens comes up and it says, what's your organization? What's your organizational unit? What's your city and your country do you live in? All that stuff. So you're doing similar stuff here in ICM using this Keytool command again. So notice what I've typed in here up top, command line, still in that CA certs folder, doing a Keytool-gen key pair command. So trying to generate a key pair. I'm specifying the alias, so -alias daw1.sunsetcc.com. That alias doesn't really have to be anything specific. Probably should be something you would recognize if you look through a list of 73 objects. Oh, that's my ICM admin workstation server. The contents of this does matter, as you'll see in 1 second. I'm going to do a -v here for verbose on this command line. Again, that -v could have been at the end here somewhere. I'm specifying a key size of 2048, key algorithm of RSA. If you've done some key work, that's pretty standard stuff. And I want to do this on behalf of that key store called CA Certs. So it comes back and it says, all right, I'm going to generate a 2048-bit RSA key pair and self-signed certificate valid for 90 days that you can use to go submit to some CA server and see if you get that thing signed, right? So kind of a, let's call this a temporary certification request, if you will. And what you don't really see here, which I've truncated that a little bit, is when I hit enter, it's going to come up and ask me for a bunch of input. First off, it's going to ask me for my name. It just says name. And you look at it initially and it says, you know, example, administrator. You go, I'm certainly not putting my name in there, so I'll just leave that blank. And you hit enter. And if you do that, you've shot yourself in the foot. Because what the system really wants as a name, or more importantly as a canonical name, is actually the fully qualified domain name of the doggone server that you're using. If you don't do that, you'll find later on when you try to do some certificate work, it'll come up with basically an unknown certificate because you put in an unknown name. That's not exactly clear along the way. Learned that a bit the hard way, but when it asks you for your first and last name, make sure you use your fully qualified domain name. From there, whatever you're using as an organizational unit, as an organization, as a city or location, state of Colorado, country of US in this case, fill all that stuff in there at the end. When you hit enter, it says, are you sure this is what you want? Get one final time to say yes or no. And now what we've got listed here is a new entry, I guess, in our key store. So at the bottom of the screen, we're doing a Keytool list using that alias again in our key store CA certs. And we can see that we've got one private key entry, chain length of 1. That means that right now, this is just kind of a self-signed certificate by this particular owner. It's signed by me, but it's not yet trusted by the CA server. So better export a copy of that file, so that I can get it out and get it signed. Remember, in the voice operating system, we had to generate the CSR, which we kind of just did, and then we had to actually go download it. So that's what we're doing here. We're still in the command line. We're still using our Keytool command. In this case, we're using a Keytool-cert request. I'd like to request a certificate for the alias daw1.sunsetcc.com. That better match the alias you provided earlier. And I'd like to create a file in some location with some kind of a name. In this case, daw1.csr. It doesn't have to match anything, just has to be unique. And I'm doing all this on behalf of that KeyStore CA certs. So now what should happen is in the Z drive, in that CSR folder, is where I have this DAW1 certificate signing request. And that's, again, that same gibberish stuff that we saw when we put the last request in from the voice operating system servers. So that's something I can now use and take over to my CA server, pop that into my signing request, hit submit, and what I get downloaded from there is actually a real certificate file that I then, of course, have to turn around and import using this Keytool command. So we really haven't talked about the import command yet, I don't believe, but not unlike what you had to do on the VOS servers, we actually have to add two certificates. We have to add the trusted cert from the CA. We have to give it an alias of root. You're going to see here that when we add certificates, we have to give them an alias that's just a unique entry in the database. Doesn't have to match your FQDN or anything like that, but apparently, according to documentation people I talk to, the alias for your CA certificate apparently should be named root. I don't know if that's a true statement or not, but mine is, and it seemed to work okay. We also have to add the certificate that was signed by the CA for this particular server. So still in that security folder, still running the Keytool command. In this case, I'm going to do an import. I want to import, in this case, notice I've got -trust CA certs, and I'm putting in an alias of root, and the file, as a continuation on the second line I'm trying to import, is on some location named ca-dns.cer. So again, this first command line here is importing or adding to my CA certs file this new certificate request, and that new certificate request was the CA cert initially here with an alias of root. It asked me if I want to trust that certificate, asked me about passwords and whatnot, still change it as the password, and it should come back and say certificate was added to the KeyStore. You could, of course, do some list commands to verify that was there. Second step, though, I've got to add now the signed certificate from the CA. Again, using the Keytool command, still using an import process. Trust CA certs. Now my alias is daw1.sunsetcc.com. I deleted the old one earlier out of there. Now I got a new one to pop in here. And I'm putting that entry in there from this file. There's the daw1.cer. That's the signed certificate request. And I'd like to do this on behalf of the KeyStore named CA certs. Again, right here, if you weren't in the right folder location, you might have to provide a, backslash this, backslash that, backslash the other thing, as opposed to just putting in CA certs, because it's looking in the local folder. So now what I have is two new entries in my CA certs file. What I have to do now? Well, restart Tomcat when finished is one of the things we point out to you over here. Where is my stinking mouse? Come back to me, mouse. So restart Tomcat when you're done with all this work. But wait, you might not be quite done yet, because there might be some other work you need to do. Actually, we're still here on the same server using the Keytool-list command. So Keytool-list with an alias of daw1. Blah, blah, blah. From the KeyStore CA certs-v for verbose. What's of interest now is previously on ER, we saw a keychain length of 1 because it was only self-signed. Now that we've got it signed by a CA server, we actually see a chain length of 2. That's, I guess, at least useful for me to go, oh, I suppose that means that this is the signed copy of that CA certificate. And in the light reading that comes up with this verbose entry, you see a whole bunch of gibberish out there that kind of lets you know that this certificate really came from a signed CA server somewhere along the way, or trusted CA server. And as we mentioned there, don't forget to restart Apache Tomcat. This is actually a little bit older screenshot. You'll find in version 12.5 anyway that's now Apache Tomcat 9, what you're looking at. So that's the ICM servers so far. The next adventure over here is the same tool on the CVP servers. Let me pause right there for a second. Take a sip of coffee and see if you got any questions. Coffee. No questions?
On the generation of the CSRs, you mentioned that it's being generated from the primary or side A. Does that apply also to side B of the servers? Thank you.
Well, yeah, pretty good question. Here's my generic answer is going to be yes. What you'll see, and especially when you come back for the afternoon session, if you do so, is that, we're not only having to do this maybe on that one ICM server. There are other servers involved where this madness has to go down. And what I started off with in the lab in a duplexed environment is actually where I did all the self-signed certificates. And what it turned out to be was that, after I got side A all up and working, and the SPOG was all happy, then I said, well, let me see what happens if I try to log into CCE admin on the side B DAW. And as you might expect, it had a totally different look and feel. It threw all kinds of errors and problems out there, all of which were security certificate related. And I said, must have to do this on side B as well. And then I said, well, let's see if I can cheat. So here's the greatest cheating thing that I've done recently. I'm not in a big habit of cheating, but I don't know if it's really cheating anyway, but this is what I did, people. I took this CA certs file, which I thought, I don't know, it seems kind of like a pretty generic CA certs file. And again, with the self-signed certificates, didn't have to necessarily do all this madness, but I had a bunch of certificates in there nonetheless from a bunch of different servers. I simply took that one file and copied it from side A to side B, restarted Tomcat, and man, I was off and trucking. So life was good. Now, if I'm using self-signed certificates, I can kind of do that because everybody's basically got a pure copy of everybody else's certificate. So as long as I can get them all into one spot, I could probably copy that around, which I was successful at doing. If you're using a CA server, now we kind of all have to have our certificate signed by the CA server, so that's not going to work quite as well, is what I'm going with there. I don't know. I kind of went off on a tangent, but does that help answer your question somewhat?
Yes. Thank you.
Fine question.
And for self-sign, what was the file? I was looking away. I'm actually doing this in a new environment as we speak, but.
So that file was that CA certs file. Remember the file we're massaging here is the file
Gotcha.
CA certs, right? So
you literally just copied that from side A HDS to side B.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Now, just because we're paranoid a little bit, right? Take that other CA certs file that's over there to begin with, save it as cacerts.old or something, and then throw the new one in there as CA certs. And if in your environment that doesn't work for whatever reason, at least you got the old copy back, right? So,
yep, smart.
But I was hopeful it was going to work, and when it did, I was pretty doggone elated, which, it made sense that it would, because it's just a file with a bunch of locally signed certificates.
Yep.
Share anyway, so that's cool. Now, on the note of CVP, And sorry, that's a driveway doorbell that keeps going off. So, of course, the morning I'm doing a presentation is when a bunch of contractors show up to do stuff. So, apologize for that. On to your CVP servers. CVP, people, stands for what? Causes various problems. That's sometimes what I think of CVP standing for. And here is just another fine example. CVP, just to be different, is going to have a slightly different version of the Keytool command. It's got a different key store we got to work with. It's not a key store named CA certs. No, that'd be far too easy. It's a different file. And of course, just to be incredibly painful, CVP is going to have different passwords for all of the certificate files across all servers, which I guess tells us we can't actually just copy a bunch of files here, there, and everywhere. So what am I looking at in this particular case? I'm on a CVP server. Remember in the SPOG, you got CVP servers, you got a reporting server, no ops console anymore if you're using package. So just my CVP servers. And notice what folder I'm in. I'm in the Cisco CVP folder, whatever drive CVP was installed to. So let's call that CVP home. That's actually a parameter you can use, right? As you can change into the CVP home directory structure, and that'll change into the Cisco CVP folder. And then up top here, I'm in the conf folder, configuration folder, and I'm mooring, or basically listing, the security.properties file. And the security.properties file has what my doggone security key store password is for this specific server. And this key store password, I'm either going to write down on a cocktail napkin or maybe just copy and paste that wacky stuff in a notepad somewhere, because I'm going to need this in 1 second when I start doing some work in the key store. Remember, the ICM key store password was change it by default. This key store password is randomized on each server, conveniently for you. And now down here towards the bottom of the page, I'm showing you that if I just am in the D drive, at the root of the D drive, by example, and I do a keytool / command, it says, yeah, I don't really know so much about the Keytool command, what the heck you're trying to do here. And that's because on the CVP servers, the executable for the Keytool command, nobody actually put in the search path in the environment variables. So unfortunately, on your CVP servers, you actually have to change into or add to your environment path. You actually have to change into the right folder where this doggone command exists. So notice I've changed into the Cisco CVP JRE/Ben folder. And in that folder, I'm doing a directory of the Keytool command. And sure enough, there's where my Keytool command is. So I kind of am at a little bit of a, catch-22 here. I either have to hang out in this folder to run this command and then specify some other folder where my key store is, or I have to go to the key store folder and then specify the relative location of where this command exists. This is just a little bit pain at this point in time, so we'll show you how to get out of it. I'm now on the right-hand side, gone back up a couple levels, so now I'm in the Cisco CVP conf security folder. And again, just a directory listing of there says, well, this is where the key store is. I'm trying to modify it, right? This is the Keytool command in this folder, left-hand side, but the key store I want to modify is in this folder on the right-hand side. So somebody's going to have to get a break somewhere along the way. Let's see what we did. Looks like I left myself in the Cisco CVP conf security folder. All right, now that conf security folder is where the key store named .keystore is located. Remember, it's no longer named CA certs. Over here, it's different, so it's called .keystore. That's the file I'm trying to modify. And the Keytool command, remember, is in some other folder structure. So notice what I put in here is %CVP home %JRE/Ben/Keytool.exe. That's basically the full path for where to find the Keytool command, because I'm in the path where the doggone key store is, right? One way, shape, or form, you've got to do both of those. a little bit painful. And I'm trying to do, in this case, a Keytool delete command from the key store named .keystore. Maybe I've got a stale alias out there of my AW. So in this case, I'm trying to delete the DAW1. And I've got it now, because it's slightly different, put in a store type JCEKS. Don't ask me to tell you what that stands for, but got to add that to your command line entry. That's just to delete that one entry if I've got an entry in there, and that's cool. And maybe now what I'm trying to do is add the latest and greatest entry in there for that same server, because I'm trying to add my primary AW certificate to the key store, or maybe a trusted certificate. So now, again, I'm in this conf security folder, and I've got to put in the full path of how to actually find the Keytool command because of that folder I'm in. And I'm going to do an import trust CA certs like we saw in the other Keytool command. The key store I'm trying to import this into is a key store named .keystore, which is in this local folder that I'm in right now. Store type, JCEKS, alias, DAW1.sunsetcc.com, and the file I'm trying to import is in some particular folder with some particular file name. Wow, that seemed like a lot of typing to get that in there. Only which to type in. Oh man, now it's asking me for that password. What was that password? That password was that ugly password we looked at on the previous screen. So you better have that password somehow handy and be able to paste that in there without hitting too many other keys, because of course it's hidden from you. You can't tell if it's got extra carriage turn line feed. So you probably have to mess with that a little bit. Get that right. And lo and behold, here comes our new entry. Do you want to trust this certificate? Of course, we said yes. So now I've hit up arrow a couple of times back to that Keytool list command. I can now see that that alias is in there as a trusted entry. And I've now, now I've got 89 entries in my key store environment. The CVP server's CA cert steps. So previous example, that's if you're maybe just doing self-signed certificates everywhere. But remember, if you're using a CA certificate server, you still have to go through basically the same adventures that you went through on your ICM servers. You're doing a Keytool command, generating a key pair up top here of an alias, key size, key algorithm, asking you for stuff like what's your first and last name again here. What you must put in is your fully qualified domain name. So that's your X509 information. Then I'm trying to actually produce a file. So I'm doing a certificate request. What's your password again? Then I would, of course, turn around and submit that request to my CA server, get a signed copy coming back, and I'd have to import two things. Have to import the root or the CA certificate itself, as well as the signed certificate. And again, you can see here all these commands are fairly similar to what we saw with the other Keytool command, except for slightly different because it's in a different path, and a couple of the command line switches are just ever so slightly different. So kind of painful adventures, restart Tomcat along the way. You might have to do other certificate requests as well, just for even just logging in, right, via IIS. Remember, some of the stuff we were talking about here was really massaging Tomcat. And if you're logging on to some of the web pages, you're doing that via IIS, not Tomcat. So similar process over there in IIS Manager with creating a certificate request, getting a file saved, completing the certificate request, and then ultimately applying it to your web server. And I think just about last but not least here, if you end up with a whole bunch of certificates and all those certificates have to get down to the clients, I'd probably recommend you use group policy to push all those trusted root CA certificates out to your clients so that you don't get a bunch of browser warnings or errors when people do try to navigate over there to those servers, inclusive of which should be, of course, your actual CA certificate itself. Okay. But you're not quite done yet, because to save you a little bit of time, what we'd maybe want to tell you about is once you even get the SPOG working, you might get a bunch of diagnostic framework portico errors. And remember, there's a couple different certificates you have to mess with here along the way. IE errors or certificates, Java certificates, and seemingly these diagnostic portico certificates are different as well. So using Firefox, I recommend you use Firefox to go out to your CVP and ultimately ICM servers, URLs for where you get diagnostic portico stuff. Remember, you can use the portico or things like RTMT across all of your CCE servers. So this URL should be kind of familiar to you. Here we're going out to a CVP server and basically using Firefox, because Firefox is pretty good at allowing us to download a certificate, in this case in a PIM format. All right, and that's fine. Do the same thing for our ICM servers. And then on our ICM servers, notice what we're doing here is we're adding some more files for diagnostic framework portico stuff. Other certificates, they have to have a different alias, simply adding those to our CA certs file. Same thing with the CVP diagnostic framework certificates. And really what that's going to prevent is probably a lot of subsequent warnings that you see when you're actually logged into the SPOG. We'll give you a bit more information on that in this afternoon's discussion. But that's kind of the end of this section. Before you all scatter off and leave to the winds, you might want to look at the last page here. I've been asked by our marketing people to add some promo stuff. So since you attended our training session, if you use the promo code here of UCCETT, I guess that's technical tech talk, apparently you get a discount on some of our UCCE classes. So sweet. That seems pretty good. Valid through June 30th, it says down there. That's all good stuff. But it looks like our session is about over, a little bit long we went, which is fine by me. Hopefully we helped you out here, perhaps. Does anybody have any questions or input or thoughts on this crazy concept of the Keytool command?
I'd like to recap kind of, if you could summarize. So first you did it on the HDS and ICM servers each, and then you copied it over to the B side, and then you did it on the CVP servers, and then you did it on the CEE admin page. Is that correct?
I kind of like that recap in general. Now that's assuming I'm using maybe self-signed certificates. Okay, if you're using self-signed certificates everywhere, basically you could import all your certificates on one of your ICM servers, call it your primary DAW, you modify that CA certs file, and then you could copy that file across to every other ICM server and say, I'm done. Sweet. That's cool. Unfortunately, your CVP servers wouldn't work that well because you have a different password, I guess, for that file on each server. So each of your CVP servers, you'd have to do some manual manipulation work with. The page I'm looking at here for the same process in IIS is really only when you log on to the SPOG, if you get a certificate warning there, you're really logging on to initially IIS. So you might have to do certificate requests. Remember, you've got multiple web servers, I guess, running on these servers. You got IIS, you got Tomcat, in some cases, maybe more than one instance of Tomcat running. So you use IIS to manage IIS certificates. You use Keystore or Keytool to manage Tomcat certificates across servers. I'm rambling now, though. I liked your recap. Seemed right.
So to correct my recap, though, I could just get one certificate file, CA certs library file, correct, on one HDS, and then I can copy it to all the other ICM servers, like my Roggers, and then do a different, do a different one for CVPs.
Yeah. Now, again, that's if you're using self-signed certificates, I would say that's true. Right. Remember, if you're not using self-signed certificates, if you're using a CA server, each device has to have its own certificate request signed by the CA server back and forth. But at the end of the day, I think you probably find that not all servers need to have certs. We'll explain that a little bit better in this afternoon's discussion on actually rolling out the SPOG. So, but too many certs is better than not enough across all systems.
So another quick question, if you start with self-signed and then later on you move to CA, specifically relating to SPOG, do you have to delete those self-signed in the key tool?
You do.
Or can you just add the CA?
No, you do have to. And no, the only reason I can say that emphatically is I kind of tried that, right? I had self-signed and then I said, well, let me see what's going on with the CA certs. And it won't allow you to put a certificate in with the same alias as one that you already have in there. I guess the aliases don't matter. You can create another alias, but it wouldn't allow me to do that. It wouldn't allow it to overwrite. So I did have to use the delete command to get the old ones out of it. And I think that's valid if you had, a new certificate after 2 years anyway. You'd probably want to get rid of the old one and install the new one. So that seems a reasonable command. Does that help out?
Sure. It does. Can you send out this slide deck?
Yeah, I've got this in a PDF form that I sent to our marketing people that were in charge of putting all this stuff together. So they're posting that out there somewhere. I don't know exactly how or where, but we'll make sure we get all that stuff to you. So all these sets of slides will be posted out there for you. Is that fair?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Problem. I'm seriously hoping that if nothing else I've done today has saved you, 6 minutes of time, that wouldn't be too much to ask. Hopefully hours if you attend all the sessions, because I've spent a lot of time beating my head against the wall on some of this stuff. And hopefully what I've learned is factual and helpful. Those two things I'm hoping to be true. If there's something that you heard today that didn't work for you, I apologize for that. Again, I told you I'm not the world's best security person. I'm not trying to lie to you. It's just what I've found along the way that hopefully is helpful to some of the rest of you. So there you have it. Other questions, comments?
Is there one right after this class?
There is actually. We're in it right now. You didn't know it, but we're in it only because of what time it is, apparently. It goes from 9 to 10, and it's just an open QA session is what it is. The sessions this afternoon, there's one at noon Mountain Time, and there's one at 2 Mountain Time, and this afternoon at noon Mountain Time is a discussion on the SPOG preparation, and the one at 2 p.m. is adding a new site to the packaged environment. And there's some common things between those two discussions, but probably the preparation of the SPOG, that's where we'll discuss briefly things we talked about here and how you do it, as well as other things you might want to think about before you try to get all SPOG'd up. The SPOG, of course, people being the single pane of glass, which is basically implies you're trying to get packaged contact center enterprise installed, is what you're trying to do. So if that helps you. Any other questions out there, people?
So, hi, Mike, it's Bill. So the order process is that you would lay down the platform, the Windows environment. This is to get to packaged, right? So you lay down the Windows platform and the ICM and CVP installs, prepare the certificates as you've shown us here, and deploy those across the components, and then you're ready to run the PCCE install for the SPOG.
That's a very good recap generally of what goes on there.
Okay. Yeah. And I haven't done a PCCE yet, so.
Yeah. Now, all the little gory details in there, we will talk about in that hour-long session, but I like that as a basic big picture recap of what you're doing. I think where you run into trouble is if you know too much from back in the day, you're like, oh, well, I know what to do next. I probably ought to do this, then the other thing. And don't do that. Just as you just heard there, lay down the OS, lay down the applications. don't touch it. Don't try to start configuring stuff. All right, domain manager is about it. And then let the SPOG do all the work. So we'll have more distinct information forthcoming, but that's a good recap.
Thanks. I'll look forward to the session this afternoon.
No problem. No problem. I appreciate all of you coming today. That was a pretty good turnout, seemed to be. So,
Did you give yourself enough time to let the contractors in?
they were delivering some lumber today, and they apparently figured it all out, and or maybe the co-worker / the wife in the other office over there, she might have gone out and helped them out. So I think we're good. All the madness stopped out there for the time being.
Just a comment aside, it's amazing how crisp the yards are looking nowadays, and fresh paint on all the houses with people having enough time.
Definitely getting all kinds of stuff done, right?
Yeah, I mean it's a phenomenon.
It's pretty wacky stuff out there. I've been a pretty busy beaver, so honeydew list is getting shorter. That seems to be an okay thing. But, hopefully everybody's safe out there, COVID free. Anybody got any crazy COVID stories they want to share with us, or good or bad? Anybody been affected?
It's been a roller coaster.
Yeah. Hopefully nobody's been too badly directly affected, and hopefully life will get back to normal here. So I don't know. All right, people. Well, time is yours. You're welcome to hang out here. We've got kind of an open Q&A session, which I'm going to come back for, but I need to go steal another cup of coffee if you don't mind. So I'm going to go do that.
Is the session on the SPOG going to use the same meeting room?
It is going to
Or
use
different?
the exact same meeting room. Yep. So
Okay.
you can stay connected in here or whatever you want to do, or come back later. This meeting will probably end at some point in time, but I will just hang up on the session is what we'll do. The meeting itself will be the same for all of the sessions this afternoon. So, there you go.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you all for coming. Nice to see some of you out there, at least virtually.